SCAN is the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network, and we very much believe in the bottom-up approach and in doing democracy differently. We've also seen around Scotland, the UK and the world, more and more often communities have been using new democratic processes to get better understanding and buy-in for local change. And there are many formats. We've heard of the Scottish Climate Assembly. There are also citizens' assembly, mini publics, and other types of democratic and deliberative processes. It's a big world, and it can be a bit confusing about where to start and what you can do at your level, how to collaborate with local authority. And today this event is very much about giving some example and inspiration about what's been happening around Scotland and the UK. Let's get right ahead with our first speaker. Eva Schonveld is a climate activist and process designer and facilitator. She has co-convened the Transformative Conflict for Transition Network Summit and supports sociocratic system development, decision-making and facilitation in many contexts, including Extinction Rebellion Scotland. Eva is a co-founder of the Starter Culture, Heartpolitics, and also the organization she's going to be talking about today, Grassroots to Global. And she's also a co-author of Politics, Trauma and Empathy. So Eva, I'm very much looking forward to hearing about your work, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here. So I'm going to give just like a brief overview of what deliberative democracy is and what assemblies are. And there's quite a lot of specialized technology, so I'll go through some of the terminology, sorry. So I'll go through some of that because it can be helpful just to know what people are, when people say people's assemblies or people say citizens' assemblies, what they mean. But I'm also an activist in this area and have been working specifically around assemblies for the last couple of years. So I have a bunch of opinions about the best ways of doing this, and I'll try and be clear when it's me speaking from that experience as well. The approach that my project Grassroots to Global has been developing with others comes from a kind of cultural and a psychological approach, where we see that many of the big problems that we're facing today, like climate change, but also structural inequality, racism, poverty, the class system, they all stem from the same cultural root causes. And we see that becoming more conscious about the assumptions that we've learned growing up within this culture, and consciously co-developing in new cultures, and specifically ways of making our collective decisions, that's a way to address all of these symptoms at the same time. So what is deliberative democracy? I looked it up online, as you do, and the Cambridge Dictionary says that it is involving careful thought and discussion when making decisions, which I thought was quite funny because isn't that supposed to be what we do, rather than this being the new flavour of the month? And actually, you know, it is different from the kind of collective decision making that we are used to. It normally involves bringing people together, usually with some educational input, so that people aren't expected to be experts when they walk in the room. They're presented with as a range of different opinions that they can then talk about and deliberate on together. And they're also facilitated through a range of processes to help people think about what they've heard and to talk and listen with one another, listening well being a really important element here. And eventually coming up with some decisions, or at least more usually recommendations, to pass on to the real power holders. So what we're used to, as opposed to deliberative democracy, is just called democracy, and it's evolved from a system, you know, that was originally held in place through threat of violence, when we had kings, and when we only had people who were landed gentry in the parliament. And of course it's moved on from that very, very dominating way of thinking and doing things. There's been changed, has been squeezed out of that system over many times, over many years, and it is more open than it once was. But there are still a lot of unquestioned assumptions within it, and within those of us who've grown up, who've kind of grown up with it, unquestioned assumptions about how and by whom good decisions get made. And it's also very easily corrupted and co-opted, as we've seen. It's very liable, the party system is very liable to groupthink and to in-group, out-group thinking. And this way of politics kind of encourages opposition and factionalism rather than collaboration and cooperation and creative thinking. So that's our starting point here, is the assumption that that we could do better with our collective decision making. We could create a new deliberative system, which is much more robust, much less easy to corrupt, which encourages us to learn and think together and not assume we know right now, that what we know right now is the whole picture, and which tries to be more open about the power relations between us and creates fairer processes and draws in the experience of those with less power and learns from their experience. And a system which teaches us skills in collaboration and creative thinking, listening well and empathizing with one another. And the last few decades have seen massive developments of new ways of understanding how best we organize ourselves and how best we make good collective decisions. Sociocracy, which SCAN is one kind of organizing principle that SCAN uses, is one of those, and deliberative democracy, the whole raft of things that we call deliberative democracy, is another. And most of these ways are showing how there's so much to be gained from shifting from this power over and control paradigm to more of a power with collaboration, creative thinking paradigm, that we really genuinely do get better decisions out of that way of doing things. And also, in order to get to that, there's a real need to unpick some of the learning and the assumptions that we've absorbed in living in this culture. So looking at what assemblies are, there's three main types that people tend to talk about: people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, and representative assemblies. So people's assemblies are really kind of like, we're trying to get everyone in the room. Anyone who wants to can turn up. It tends to be people who care about the issue, or who think they care about the issue one way or another. So one of the big jobs of people's assemblies is trying to engage with people who might otherwise not turn up and persuade them that this is worth being part of. Citizens' assemblies are done by invitation, and they're trying to create within a small group a kind of representation of the larger group. So within your city or your country, whichever the assembly is trying to address, they'll use a process called sortition to try and kind of create a little model so that there's old people, there's young people, there's people from different backgrounds, and those are the people who will be deliberating together. So not anyone can turn up, but again, this is quite a well-worn and well-trusted way of using democratic techniques like this. And the Scottish Government has run a couple recently, and it is kind of becoming a bit flavour of the month. There are also assemblies that use representation, and that's a way of kind of scaling up. So people maybe who've been at different assemblies would come together. Some of them would come together in a larger to a higher level assembly. But at this stage, we're not really talking about those, so I'm not going to talk about those. The last thing really that I wanted to say is just to outline three of the ways that assemblies make change. We've been calling them three pathways. They're the kind of the ways that things can come out of assemblies. And the first pathway would be like direct action by people in the community. So you've turned up, you found out that a bunch of other people really like the idea of a community garden. You've identified a space in your community that could be used. You can just go out there and do that. The second pathway, that's a very common one to come out of assemblies, is one where we can't just go and do this ourselves, and so we need to engage with existing power holders, whether that's a local authority or the national government, we need to go out. Maybe we will do local research, petitions, we'll send a delegation, we'll write letters. But this can be problematic because the current power holders don't necessarily listen to what comes out of assemblies, and processes can kind of get lost in the slow wheels of government as it stands. A third pathway, which has not been used so much here, but one that Grassroots to Global in particular are really interested in, is this a pathway that we create ourselves, a citizen-led pathway there where we would create a higher level assembly for ourselves, a citizen-led assembly, and if we can do this in a really transparent way, we can claim some kind of moral legitimacy. And if we're in a process where people are starting to understand the lack of democracy that there is in our current structure and the potential for citizen-led processes to be much more fully democratic, then we can potentially move towards more and more legitimacy for those kinds of processes. Obviously, that's in the future. So the potential here certainly is that we can build skills and resilience and confidence in our communities, and this is a win no matter what else happens. We can influence the current system towards more open democracy, which is already happening, even though there are lots of pitfalls and difficulties with that. And ultimately, we may be able to transform or even replace the current political system. So that's all stuff to bear in mind while you're listening to the other speakers. And sorry for going on so long.
Excellent, Eva. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's very important to set the scene as you've done to understand what we're talking about. Our next speaker will be Andy Smith, who is a registered UKCP psychotherapist, supervisor, and training supervisor. He co-founded Diversity Matters and was instrumental in the design and delivery of the in-person centered approach at Queen Margaret University. One of his latest projects is the Go Deep game, which won an award for innovation in global education. Andy's continues to develop projects focused on collective well-being of people, place, and the planet. And Andy's gonna make us discover what the Go Deep game is about and how it relates to local democracy and deliberative processes.
So I'll just very, very briefly give you an outline of this kind of audacious game that was designed by 7 different facilitation teams in 8 different countries. So, and what we wanted to do 5 years ago was design a community building process that would build resiliency in community, that would somehow engage people over the long term. The original idea kind of grew out of a process in Brazil called the Oasis game. I don't know if people have heard of that, but it's basically, it's a game in the sense that it has challenges. So you have to work in a team, you have to overcome different problems. And over a period of 4 or 5 days in the Oasis game, people might build a community center. They might create a park. So it's very much in the level 1 that Eva was just talking about in terms of community building and direct action. And Go Deep is a kind of evolution of that to also support communities to deal with diversity issues and internal conflicts that might be there in community. So it's not just about creating something or building something in community, but also about kind of developing relationships, supporting interaction, developing networks, and helping people anchor their sense of the gifts and talents of a community, so that community can actually continue after the game and after the facilitation process. That's part of the game. So how does it work? So how it works is that you start off at point A and you end up at point D on the map, and you play the game over 4 or 5 days, or 10 evenings, or you know, that kind of thing. But you're using that amount of time really to take the community, a group, through a series of challenges. And the first part is actually building. Part A is getting ready. You might start with a group of 4 or 5 people or 10 people, and getting ready takes about a day. And during that period, you try and identify what it is you want to change. You're asked to build the network. So typically, you might say if you started off with 10 people, you might end up with 20 people by the end of day 1. And then you choose a particular topic you want to work on. And the game basically is a series of cards and a series of challenges that you have to go through. So each of these different topics, vision, creativity, power, diversity, or resilience, helps the community focus on one of those issues. And you follow through a series of challenges. Because the game was funded originally through Erasmus Plus funding in the EU, then the game is actually downloadable. So you can actually download the game and play it. But we really recommend that you play it, first of all, with trained facilitators. And then every time we've played the game so far, we've managed to train more facilitators in the game itself. So the idea is we want something that's going to be easy to use and people can carry on without having to get external support. So yeah, so basically after a few days, what do you do? Well, not only do you increase the network, the number of people involved, you're trying to also create something tangible and something real. So not just building a sense of community, but actually building something real. So now that might be that it's harder in Europe to build something from scratch. Like in Brazil, it might be possible in a favela to build a community center from scratch because you wouldn't need necessarily planning permission. But in what we've been able to do is things like we've been able to rejuvenate buildings, we've been able to create community gardens, we've developed festivals, supporting diversity, and so on. So community orchards have been set up. So things like this, which people already, we know how to do. There's nothing brand new in this technology, but what Go Deep tries to do is to really support a very simple method. So it's once you've got the idea, you can follow the cards and go through the process with a group. If you're a facilitator or a community worker, you can do that. Now, since we developed it and we've been running it in various different countries and different ways, this is a bit out of date, but I think we played it about 40 times now. In different places, and we keep on researching it. And it's been researched twice in terms of its power and efficacy. Does it really work? And how does it make a difference and what changes? And I can talk more about that in the breakout room if people are interested. Okay, so if you go here, you can see that oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. So the final thing I wanted to say was that many of the facilitators that have been involved in the design, so there were originally about 14 of us that designed it together, is that many of us have been or are involved with participative democracy, deliberative democracy methods, town hall meetings, running assemblies, and so people are at the moment in a number of countries trying out Go Deep techniques inside assemblies and inside democratic methods. And probably, because I'm talking really quickly, not being able to dance or sing, you might not also get an idea that actually the game is fun. Even though it might be working on conflict or community differences or trying to iron out competing power issues in communities and various things like that, there's also a fun element to it. So as much as possible, we try and celebrate and create an atmosphere that changing communities and making the world a better place is also a fun thing. It can be fun.
Thanks very much, Andy. I think the idea of fun, bring the fun back into communities, I think that also ensures that you'll have a diversity of people coming in. Last speaker of the first section is Gavin Christian, who is the Artistic Director of Active Inquiry and has been in post since the start of the company in 2008. Before setting up Active Inquiry, Gavin worked as a freelance drama worker and as a research assistant at the Centre for Community Arts Research and Practice, also at Queen Margaret University. Gavin has over 12 years of experience in running both small and large-scale community arts projects, and he's also an established workshop leader and theatre director. And Gavin is now going to talk to us about, again, yet another very interesting aspect of community and deliberative processes, which is legislative theatre. So Gavin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Matteo. And hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here and fascinating to hear Eva and Andy so far. So I'll say briefly what I'm doing and I'll expand on it if anyone wants to come to the breakout session. So I run a theatre company based in Edinburgh called Active Inquiry. Our work is mostly with adults, mostly with what we may say is non-theatre professionals. But the whole idea about our company is to create excellent theatre for dialogue and for action. So the idea is that we're using theatre as a process to really create dialogue and to be able to think about action that can be taken. The type of theatre or the kind of body of theatre that we use comes from a term called the theatre of the oppressed, which also comes from Brazil, as Andy was saying, comes from a theatre director called Augusto Boal. And for those of you that are in education theory, based on the ideas of educational ideas of Paulo Freire. So the whole idea that education is for dialogue and for action and renaming the world together, and that we are all experts in something and we can have a dialogue of knowledges together. So that's the kind of educational foundations of the theatre that we use. And what I'm going to talk about is legislative theatre, which is part of the theatre of the oppressed. And it came from when Augusto Boal was in Brazil in the early 90s. He actually got elected as a kind of a city councillor for Rio de Janeiro, and decided to spend the budget, his staffing budget, on the kind of theatre directors, really, or community theatre directors, who would go out and create theatre groups in favelas and in neighbourhoods, and they would create and make theatre that was about the problems that they were facing. So really asking them to present those problems on stage. And the whole idea about the theatre of the oppressed is that it's a place for trying out ideas and learning. So a type of theatre called forum theatre means that you present a play twice. But the second time you present it, the audience can stop the play, they can come in, replace a character and try something else, try something different. So it's a space for, it's not to find the right solution, it's a space for kind of learning, rather than just talking about how we might solve a problem. You're actually trying things out in practice. You're trying things out and seeing what works, rehearsing for reality, as Boal used to say. And so he took this kind of type of theatre forward, one stage forward, if you like, when he was a vereador, and developed legislative theatre, in which what also happened during this process of trying things out on stage was asking the audience a question of, if you had the power to make a new law, what would it be to help solve this problem? So audiences would write or talk about laws, and these would all get sifted and passed through and debated, and then maybe 2 or 3 proposals would come out of the process, which would then be debated by an audience and would be voted on. Now, when Boal did it, it was kind of green and red cards. There's various different ways now it's been used across the world, you know, and in various different kind of guises. Most recently, New York, it's been used a lot in New York. There's a theatre company called the Theatre of the Oppressed New York who've used it at a city level in New York and have passed some laws during using this process. And in Scotland here, we are developing, we're in the middle of a project. So I can't talk like maybe others about a really successful project that's behind them. I can talk about one we're in the middle of, and which is called Drama for Democracy. And we are working with people who've experienced homelessness and addiction, with women of colour who've experienced domestic violence, and with adults with mental health difficulties. And we're doing some work to develop a legislative theatre project here in Scotland, with the plan of using theatre buildings across Scotland as sites of participatory democracy. So that's what we really want to do. There's been lots of talk from theatres, particularly during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, about how theatres can be much more relevant to their local communities, how they can be civic hubs, you know, and lots of talk about this. So I'm very interested in, you know, we're trying to say, well, look, we've got a perfect project here to turn that talk into action. And to be fair to a lot of theatres, we've had some nice buy-in from it. So but that's in the future. We're kind of developing a process that will take us to the end of 2024 within this. So I will talk about that process a lot more in my session. But I'm really interested in talking about legislative theatre in my session, and also to talk about the process that we're doing and to be challenged. I mean, we're in the middle of the process here, and I'm not trying to copy a model that's from Brazil, because that's not going to work in Scotland. So I'm really interested in how that model might be adapted, what we might be doing here, what mistakes we're making, or what questions we need to keep asking ourselves as we move forward. So getting your input on that is something that I'm really interested in my session. And I think I'll finish there, because I think that's okay for me. Thank you.
Lovely, Gavin. Thanks so much. Really interesting work again. We now have about 10 minutes, so until 2:45 for questions. So
I can just respond to that one in the chat about the climate chaos. Or one of we've identified kind of 3 paths that we're taking on this project that have come from our participants, and one of them is about what we can do to address the climate crisis. So that is part of what we're investigating at the moment.
Okay, a question from Alison to Andy. Have you got a bank of facilitators that would travel around the country to facilitate the game playing?
Yeah, sure. We've got about, hi Alison. Sure, I think there's about 150 facilitators now internationally, but in Scotland we have about 12 or 13 facilitators now that we've trained up who can run the game, basically. Yes, and sure, obviously there's funding issues about getting people around the country and to do that, but they're all really dedicated to rolling this out, really. So yeah, we have a small team. So we set up an organization in Scotland, which we creatively named Go Deep Scotland, and that's just formed in the last few months and is getting ready to go.
I'd really like to ask all of the presenters, what are your strategies for reaching out beyond the usual suspects? We all very often get stuck in a kind of, there's us that are doing the democracy work, and there's those people out there that we want to get into the room with us. So what might those strategies look like to reach out beyond the usual suspects?
It's a real challenge, because anybody here as a community builder will know that the weak links are often lead to the highest kind of creativity. So how you actually make contact with people you don't know, or maybe that are 1 or 2 steps removed from you, that's a big part of the beginning of the Go Deep game. So some of the challenges you're asked to do, which you never have to do on your own, you only do it in a small team or in a pair, is actually to start connecting with people that you don't quite know, or somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And through that process, you can start to build and bring in people. Invite isn't bringing in, sounds a bit too proactive, but to invite people to engage, and you want to share your dreams and visions for a community with those people. So it is I think it's possible to do. I mean, I think there's a lot of techniques about how you do that. It's actually scary for a lot of people to go out and say hello to people they don't know very well, who are from a different culture or a different class or a different background. But actually, you can learn how to do that, and it leads to amazing results.
Yeah, I love the playful approach that Go Deep takes. And I remember you telling me, Andy, that often people are going out and doing that as part of the game session, which I really like, that kind of like very immediate approach to it. I think my tendency tends to be kind of completely opposite, which is, I think actually it was something that I heard you saying, Kate, which is that the 90% of the work of an assembly happens before the assembly. And it's exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about here. It's making those connections. It's going out of your way to find people, or people who know people, and have those conversations about, like, so what's really important to you? What would make this process unmissable for you? And I don't think you're going to be able to. I mean, I reserve the right to be wrong, but I would suspect that it's very difficult to have 100% attendance, particularly if you're looking at quite a large area. But I think we can go way, way beyond the usual suspects that we tend to have. And for me, it's almost always about personal contact, knocking on people's doors, actually speaking to them, actually meeting them, because I think that we in our minds very quickly set up differences between us and reasons why we can't connect with one another. But when you actually meet another person and have a chat with them, 9 times out of 10 there is a good connection, and I think that's one of the really big tools I would want to mention. You got anything, Gavin?
Yeah, just to say, for me, time, it takes a long time, I think, to do that. And so that's why this is a long project that we're doing, because we recognize that you can't do things quickly. And we're building in a stage, so what we're doing at the moment is creating small pieces of theatre that are going out to community groups around in the kind of geographical locations of the theatres that we want to perform in the next year. So we're building, and we're doing workshops and building those relationships. Like Eva said, for me, it takes time.
What kind of funding have you all got that would allow accessibility required to engage with the wider community?
So at the moment we're funded by Creative Scotland, but for this stage we haven't, and you can build some accessibility funding into Creative Scotland applications, but we are looking for a much bigger funding for the next stage. So we're having to fund each stage as it goes. We haven't got funding for the whole project, but we're very aware of that accessibility. I mean, it's most of the people that are actors have access issues, and we're doing a lot of hybrid work now. So people come in on Zoom and coming into the space. We're also developing work with a digital theatre company. So the idea is that you don't have to be in the theatre building. You can actually access remotely, and how that might look and be just as useful an experience. So it's not like you're just watching from the back, but you can't really participate. So that's kind of in our thinking at the moment. But in terms of funding, we're hoping that funders will go for that.
Go Deep Scotland has no funding at all at the moment. So we're just started. So we're looking for funding streams at the moment. Go Deep International, which is the bigger body, has one stream of funding running at the moment, which is developing version 5 of the game. And then making that available, hopefully, once it's been tested. But we don't have any funding at the moment. So any ideas or donations welcome.
We also don't have specific funding for accessibility, but I do think that it's a super important issue. And again, like Gavin was saying, that it's not just about how do we get people into our building, it's also about how do we adapt these processes so that people don't have to come into our building, but they can still really meaningfully participate. And I think that's something that with deliberative democracy is right in its very, very early stages, but it's super exciting to think about and experiment with.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Jean-Mathieu, and thank you everyone for very interesting input so far. I look forward to the workshops and going a bit deeper in at least one of those areas. I guess I was just wondering if anyone had some examples where such process has actually led the powers that be to make real change, and where it's really leveraged a counterpoint to what you were describing, Eva, or Eva, I'm not sure. Anyway, to the current pitfalls of our democratic system. So yeah, to what extent are the powers, those with the traditional powers, able to enact on what the deliberative processes are delivering to them?
The one that I'm aware of that always gets trotted out is the assembly that was in Ireland around abortion, where the law was changed based on what came out of the assembly. And I think that there have been other instances where there has been actual hard impact. I think what we've seen in the UK so far, certainly with the two climate change assemblies that we had, the one in Westminster and the one in Holyrood, was very, very disappointing, and kind of echoed the experience of many of us who've been working in community climate action for many years, that the things that we come up with don't seem to find a home with those who are currently within the power structures, which is why, in Grassroots to Global and the other organisations that I'm working in, we're really interested in building legitimacy for citizen-led processes. It's really comes from despair, I'm afraid to say.
I mean, I could say with using legislative theatre, there has been some. So in Brazil, I think 13 new laws were passed. Certainly be some new stuff happening in New York. So there was definitely a law that was passed in the city about ID cards and not having to have a gender on them, because they worked with a lot of trans youth. There has been stuff in Portugal done, and one of the theatre practitioners is now a member of the parliament in Portugal, still practicing legislative theatre. So there was a law in Austria passed using it. So I do think it has the potential. I think what we're coming up against and what's quite tricky is the disconnect, if you like, between the way. So we're all doing some stuff with trying to connect with elected politicians at the moment, and the disconnect between the way they do politics and the way we want to do politics, and how easy it is to be subsumed into the way that they do it, because that's what they do. So I think there's lots of questions, and that's partly the reason we're doing it in such a long process as well, so that we're not easily subsumed and we're actually building that relationship as we go. But yeah, it's one of the big questions around it, I think.
I think it's a massive, difficult problem, isn't it? And some of the go deep games it depends what we mean by local power stuff as well, because some of the go deep facilitators have been working in Barcelona and other towns and cities using go deep processes with local assemblies, and that has led to local changes, but it's a massive system that we're dealing with. We're kind of pulling the tail of a dragon, aren't we, when we're dealing with this kind of thing? So I think we're all just learning all the time how to kind of integrate the methods with the macro system and the local system, and how to deal with that. And Eva was talking about these different pathways. I think we have to collectively, we've got to find different pathways. We do have a lot of techniques. I mean, there's so much creativity, I think, in this area already in the world. That makes me kind of positive in one way.
Our next speaker is Bob Whalley, who's a researcher in climate change engagement and communication with the University of Central Lancashire, and is a co-founder of Envirevolution, which is a Manchester-based volunteer-led cooperative which organizes community engagement events concerning climate change in partnership with the Manchester Climate Change Agency and Hub. So Bob Whalley, again, has got extensive experience of organizing and delivering a community climate assembly. So he's going to share some of his findings with us. Bob, the floor is yours, and I'll be sharing the screen as well.
Great, thank you very much, John Matthew. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me along. It's always good to be part of an event like this where everyone's working towards the same goals. So yes, as John Matthew said, I'm a lecturer in community leadership, but also a researcher in climate change engagement and communication. And yeah, co-founder of Envirevolution, which is Manchester-based cooperative and it aims to engage people across the country in free events, workshops and festivals in their local spaces, which those communities might use anyway. But then they come across our 2 solar powered stages, playing world music to act as a hook to get people in. Environmentally themed games and activities for the kids, all vegan food stalls, and of course our interactive workshops and talks from individuals and organizations which are doing amazing things across the region, offering positive and proactive response options that are both relevant and appropriate for that area. Which means if it's a sunny day, and luckily we've been blessed with the weather so far in Manchester for the most part, we can expect to welcome up to 6,000 people at these events over the course of the day, who are then more informed as to the choices they can make locally. Next slide, please. And yes, we also run projects like last year's, it was Manchester's first ever community assembly on climate change. And so we did run that with the Manchester Climate Change Agency and others. It was 7 weeks long and aimed to engage people from diverse demographics across Manchester. And we recruited 106 participants in total. And yeah, just quickly in response to the question about engaging people who wouldn't usually attend this kind of thing and think, oh, that's about climate change, that's not relevant for me. We tried a few things. So our recruitment used wording like, what would you like your city to look like? Come and have your say in how your local community can thrive or grow, and play with that a little bit. But also community connectors, like Eva mentioned before, is very important too. So that person who's been running that community project for 20 years, or that runs that local mosque, anybody who's sort of already built up that rapport with the people from the local area, they're the really good ones to get on your side to start off with. And also people need to know that it's going to go somewhere. And so you've got to be careful what you promise, but you've got to be clear and organized enough to ensure that the outcomes are going to be heard and used, and not just filed away somewhere. There's other things too, and I could just talk about that for 6 minutes, but I should probably move on. So next slide, please. We had a number of outcomes, which can all be found online on our open access SharePoint, as our aim is to use the learning gained to inspire and inform similar future ventures, where I'm presenting what worked, what didn't, what participants got out of it, and recommendations we have going forwards. Next slide, please. The topics of our assembly included those on the screen, and each workshop provider was given the same brief to present and discuss a theme which focuses on the issue and a range of associated challenges and possible solutions with project outcomes in mind. We also had Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research to reiterate why it's important we respond proactively on all levels to the climate emergency. There's a group called Anthesis who came in and gave a guide to the priorities for Manchester City Council's objectives and actions in their implementation plan, which many of the participants had never heard of before. We also had Professor Matt Patterson from University of Manchester, who's a bit of a legend. He's a previous lead author of IPCC reports and a professor of international politics. So he went on about how to get people on board, how can we make our responses win-wins as much as possible, who's going to be a barrier to this and who's going to help. Next slide, please. So action plans for the different geographical areas detailed what people could do in their neighbourhoods given the right conditions. So if there was funding, capacity, there was people on board or to get it going, and other support mechanisms. So there was, as you might imagine, quite similarities as far as green space access and use, street closures for any traffic, green play streets, cycling access, confidence and skills training. There are also many differences, especially between the city centre group and the suburbs as far as goals, uses of buildings and open spaces, and more of a concentration on themes like pollution levels. Next slide, please. And then there was the mandate, which represented what people are unable to do, and so what their requirements are as far as infrastructure and policy changes, which needs to be made by local council, business, national government. So this document was presented to otherwise inaccessible members of Manchester City Council Chief Exec team from the concerned citizens of Manchester who took part. And so it took into account the key topic areas. So a lot on pollution, pushes for a car-free city centre, and waste management and a citywide ban on single-use plastics. And then there was other themes on sort of retrofit and energy production, greater food sovereignty, circular economics and procurement, things like that. The provision of educational initiatives on all of these things so that people understand them and what they mean was that main overarching outcome of the mandate, really. So things like retrofit, a lot of the participants just had no idea where to start with it and who they could ask. I didn't. So it was, there's a lot of valuable themes that came up. Next slide, please. So all of our findings and our feedback went into impact assessment of the project, which, along with all the other resources, like the project film, can be found on the website, which I'll be sure to pop up. But some examples of feedback can be seen on the slide there. So one of the most valuable things was that opportunity to get conversations going with those higher up. So not as a chance for participants to have a rant or photo op for any chief exec members or politicians or anything like that, but for everyone there to begin figuring out how to implement some of the actions that were identified. And everybody's in the room because they wanted to be in the room. So, there was another theme that came out of the assembly, which was like, right, how do we get more people in the room? And that was for all the participants as well as the other people, the chief exec members from City Council. And that was constantly being pushed. Next slide, please. Some people found workshop topics extremely valuable, where for others, they didn't find it as relevant to them. And also some groups weren't as diverse as others. So it was really interesting to see the difference of opinion there, which is also picked up in the project film. I'd say the best outcome of the assembly was just mobilizing 106 people from across the city. Some who've been active in some way for maybe 20 years, had a good amount of experience that they could bring to the process. Others had just seen a David Attenborough documentary. They got kids a bit scared. All of the participants just needed something that they could get involved in that could just potentially make that difference. And so this provided the opportunity to meet others who felt the same way. Next slide, please. And so for my breakout room, we'll be looking at how a climate assembly could work where you are and exploring the different elements involved in setting one up, and to see what you can take from the Manchester Climate Assembly that could be of use for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bob. Most excellent, presentation, and also the work you've been doing there. I mean, it's really, really inspiring for what can happen everywhere. Our next speaker will be double act. Jamie Hamilton and Roland Plave are directors of the Community Chartering Network, CCN, which is an organization set up to explore and establish new models for community engagement and regeneration around shared lived experiences of place. CCN supports communities to make collective decisions about the future of local places. Its mission is to support genuinely sustainable local development, and their work aims to enable truly resident-led outcomes that are tailored to specific local contexts, local needs, and local priorities. So without further ado, over to you, Jamie and Roland.
Thank you, John Matthew. We're going to be talking about the Citizens Panel on Climate Change, which has been happening in Dumfries and Galloway. And it's a project that's been in progress so far. We've been going for about 8 or 9 months. And because we've only got a short amount of time, we're going to just focus on the process so far. So in terms of the design and how we manage the engagement process. And this should give you an overview of the process as a whole. So if you'd like to hear more about the outcomes and the details and the contents, please join our breakout room after, and we can talk more about those. So I'm going to start with the principles that CCN have developed over time. We've had about 12 years of experience designing, facilitating community deliberation processes, and we've come up with these principles, which we feel, well, they're a distillation of our learning so far. And we feel they have quite a good track record of engaging people to develop plans and actions towards sustainable and towards building sustainable and resilient places. So the first principle that we follow, and these are the principles that we've also used for the citizens panel in Dumfries and Galloway. The first principle is place. And so what we mean by this is when conversations around sustainability, we feel they need to be grounded in the specifics of each place if they're to be concrete and tangible and have actions that can be acted on. So deliberating the priorities for sustainability and action on climate change, we work with only residents of a place, as we feel residents have a particular relationship to their place, which is not fixed to any kind of organizational or business interest, any vested interest. And residents have a relationship to their place, which is about living in that place. So we only work with residents in the deliberation phase. We do involve other people further down the line. The next principle is lived experience. So we always start our deliberations by asking people to reflect and speak from how they experience the place that they live in. Not their views and ideas about climate change or carbon emissions or things like that, but their very lived experience of their places itself. So talking about place and residents' lived experience of it starts to build up an understanding of the diverse ways that people think about their places and how a place also meets their needs. It also helps to build understanding between the participants about the different perspectives on place. And when we want to think about decision making about the future of the place, what happens is that people start to build up an understanding that they need to reflect, acknowledge and respect each of these views. And what we find in practice is that consensus actually starts to build up and understanding starts to build up between people when they understand each other's lived experience of their place that they share. And this, we find, moves kind of smoothly into finding agreement around the priorities of their place when thinking about sustainability and resilience. So the next principle is unity and diversity. So diversity is of course important for inclusivity, but we also have found that we have this contradictory idea that with an increase in diversity, we find that actually there's an increase in the level of agreement around plans for particular places. So an example, a concrete example of this is when we've worked on life plans across different communities. We aim to gather as diverse a working group, which is a small working group, who can talk about and discuss and deliberate on a plan for the whole community. And we find that if we get the diversity right in that group, then when that plan that the small working group share out with the whole community agrees on that plan very quickly. And so there's a kind of a fractal idea that we work with, that if we get diversity genuinely represented in a small group, this reflects the views of the larger whole of the community and all the residents who live in that place. The next principle is emergence. So this is the idea that residents determine the content and discussion and of the deliberation. We create structures to enable people to have a free and fair and inclusive deliberation, but they bring the content and they wholly decide and determine what that will be. So in the citizens panel, we have phases, and later we involve the council and other specialists, sustainability specialists in the conversation, but each phase is determined by the panel members themselves. The last principle is care, and this is sort of self-evident. It's care for each of the principles that I've just talked about. It's care for all of those people involved. It's also care for the content and the process, and we try to reflect as faithfully and accurately as possible what people bring to the process. I'm going to hand over to Jamie now.
Okay,
Who will talk
so
a bit more about the panel.
I think we've only got about a minute left, so I'll give it the best shot. So the citizen panel in Dumfries and Galloway is it's the first local authority, we think, in the UK to actually set a really ambitious net zero target, which is 2025, which is kind of scary. But the purpose of the citizen panel is action on that net zero target. That's always at the back of our mind, because quite often the purpose becomes the panel itself. We built a panel, hooray! No, it's actually got to result in actual change. So we've got some challenges because we've got this thing where no one knows what to do with climate change. People will tell you they think they know what to do, but actually it really is one of those textbook situations which requires all collective wisdom of everybody involved in it. And back to the principles is we think that must start in place. It's got to be real. It can't just be ideas. And so in terms of collective decision, there are some kind of biological limits. Dunbar's number, 150 is about the maximum size of an effective community. People, a table 6 to 8 in focus group, 12 to 20 for maybe a work group. I mean, these are all have been evolved over time to be, pretty good sizes. And so essentially we've got how can we get a whole region, the place of a whole region to speak together and reach consensus. So essentially we're working backwards from the maths. So we said, well, that looks like 5 places, 15 in each place. We've got to get the absolute requisite diversity in those places. And we've got to get a requisite diversity of different places. Which it's an insane idea, but to the extent possible can be said to represent the region. And the aim of the council is this is an ongoing dialogue. So this is a co-production of the strategy between government and the citizens.
There's a bit of information up there for you to look at, but I'll just briefly say about the engagement side of things and how especially we try to engage those who are so-called hard to reach. You'll see there's 96 citizens engaged across 5 places. We actually, before we set up the panel itself, we try to talk to each of those, we do talk to each of those people, and we actually get to know those people individually before they participate. But how we start is we go and contact people from each of the places. There may be community councils, there may be anchor organizations, and we try to understand and learn about the place. And we can go into more detail about this later in the breakout room. But essentially, we hear from those people. We spend a lot of time researching the place and understanding the place from those different anchor organizations. We explain our principle of diversity and how this is an important aspect. And what we find is that actually, when we talk to people about that, people really understand what we're trying to do. And then they try to help us to meet that diversity principle by suggesting different people, different demographics within their community, within their place. They point us to them, and we go through the process again. We try and understand. We try and talk to them, we understand their different demographics, we tell them about the principle of diversity, and we broaden it out as step by step like that. And in the process, we also learn about the history of the place. We also have a walk around, and essentially we build the panel together. If we find we've got too many men in there, we go back to the men and we say, look, we've got too many men. This isn't meeting our principle of diversity. Help us to meet it. And we've also engaged a lot of young people in each of the panel places that have taken part. At least 4 young citizens have been successfully engaged. They've been an integral part of the conversation, actually. We've, again, we'll go into more detail if people want to hear about that, how we did that. But actually, when we brought them together, initially we thought we'd do it as a separate process, young people separate from adults, but actually we found that it would be better to include them, again, to meet this principle of diversity and unity. And they've been an integral part of the conversation, and young people, as we know, see climate change as a clear and present danger, and their contributions have actually been essential, even down to primary level. So we've got 9-year-olds to 91-year-olds engaged, and a really diverse mix, which you'll see more about there on the slide.
kind of very briefly, we have a quite tried and tested process for getting through to complete open-endedness to very, very targeted practical steps that we applied in each of the citizen panels discussion. So it's quite a good open model, which we're quite happy to share to apply in place, which, you know, leads through to the absolute top priorities and literal steps of 1, do this, 2, do this, 3, do this. And then just kind of finally, we have all of these discussions in these areas have led to a model of how citizens see where their different priorities relate in terms of climate adaptation. And so our next phase, we're bringing in the council, and there will be groups from each area in each one of these sections if their priorities fell into them, and there'll be very, very focused discussions. Quite a lot of the conversations with local authority can be separate and can be quite adversarial, but we find that if you bring the two together and actually you engage the expertise of the local authority on a specific grounded problem which is mapped out, then that disappears and you get a very, very productive conversation again around this idea of grounded expression of place. Right, okay, that's but more in the breakout group if you want to ask, dig deeper.
Thanks so much, Jamie and Roland. That's very, again, I mean, yet another super interesting approach. So now it's again our time for a Q&A. Really interesting presentation, thank you. Was there an attempt to continue engaging, supporting participants after the assembly? If you had an unlimited budget for it, what would you do? What would you do?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Ellie. So each of the, I think it was about halfway through the assembly, we it was the right time to set up area contact groups, or group, yeah, contact groups for the different areas. And so it could be a WhatsApp or Signal group or whatever the participants felt most comfortable using. So that they could then chat more in between the sessions about developing the outcomes like the action plan and the mandate and other things, but also for that kind of that carry on possibility as well. So yeah, like I was saying about the most valuable thing being that, you know, 106 sort of more informed and reinvigorated or mobilized for the first time participants by the end of it. So they then had these support groups that they could use to get things going that they'd identified in the action plans for the different areas, or just to put on an event or whatever it might be. And so those groups are still active, some more than others, obviously. But yeah, some of them have just really took off, which is amazing to see. One thing that participants identified themselves would be to 7 weeks, fancying 7 weeks in total. But yeah, one thing the participants really wanted to do afterwards was have follow-ups, and they still keep asking me about it. So if I had unlimited budget, then it would be yeah, it would be a chance to run a follow-up of that, and yeah, kind of, I don't know, keep advancing the model, I suppose. Yeah, because that's what this is all about, and that's why it was very important that we had an impact assessment at the end of it to see what worked, what didn't, to keep on sort of developing the model. At the moment, I'm running one for under 18s. So the funding for last year's was for over 18s, and so now I'm running one with City Council Education Department for under 18s. And so that again will just add data or add learning into the Climate Assembly model, so we can just keep developing the process.
Thank you, Bob. I've got a question from Francine about who has financed the this model and the implementation of it. That's for Jamie and Roland.
So the panel is funded by the Dumfries and Galloway Council as part of their strategy around this net zero. This effort to get to kind of net zero. So that's a local authority. And in terms of how long is the DG Dumfries and Galloway panel, it's just really started. So we're just in the first phase of it. So the first phase was just is just to engage people and get these models of place that can be talked around in a more abstract way.
Now we just have time for no more than 1 minute from each group, just to share some key points. So Andy, why don't you start?
Well, I don't think we answered all the main points in the time, but one of the one focus was on individual transformation, particularly in working in communities where there's a lot of trauma and a lot of perhaps where self-belief or belief in community action is quite low. So we looked about how Go Deep was working on that particularly, because it's probably a third of the time or a quarter of the time maybe Go Deep you're working on your individual level and then the team level and then the community level. So you're continually looking at all different aspects of change. That's what we were talking about.
Thank you, Andy. How about you, Bob? I was in your room as well, but
yeah, no, it was a really good discussion. Thanks everybody who came along. There was one question at the end there, which was very poignant in our group, which was about how what the key takeaway was and how you can guarantee sort of uptake, I suppose, of the things that all these participants as part of the assembly, had put all the time and energy into, and you've got them all riled up and like, yeah, by the end of the 7 weeks, and then the last thing you want it to be is like, right, thanks everybody, bye, and that's it. So you've got to have that sort of follow on, and also you don't want to set people up for a fall. I'm sure we're all very aware of the danger of that's hit environmental movements all over the world since whenever, is that you get loads of people involved in them, and then when they don't see change happening within a couple of years, then start to get a little bit disillusioned and drop off. So yeah, you've got to try and do as much as you can to ensure that the things that people have put their time and energy into over however long your event or your project has been is being listened to, and it is going to go somewhere. And so you've got to, like I said earlier, you've got to be very careful what you are promising with this. But there are certain things you can do, and having that involvement from City Council, taking the Manchester example, was key. The assembly was set up with an arm of the City Council, so there was buy-in there, and there was a sense that there were members of the City Council that were taking it seriously, and that could be seen towards the final event where the outcomes were presented to the exec team. And so there were certain things that came out of the mandate and the action plans, which the people who were in the room because they wanted to be in the room, but are in a position of power as well. So City Treasurer was talking about how she really wanted to push for the traffic-free city centre, and that another exec member for the environment was talking about trying to push for a single-use plastic-free Manchester as a pledge. And you take the not the easy wins, but the easiest wins, I suppose, first, and then you go from there. But also the fact that it's kind of it's inspired and it's encouraged people to act as far as the community participants as well was like I said earlier, was the most valuable outcome, or one of the most valuable outcomes for sure. And so they now have more capacity to be able to push for the things in their areas as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Bob. How about yourself, Gavin?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'll do this very quickly. We had some really interesting discussion about theatre buildings themselves and those theatre institutions and what they represent to people, and getting people through the door of those, and what that actually meant, and to look at maybe some of the work that museums and galleries have been doing over the last few years. in doing that, you know, to kind of break down some of those barriers, because yes, you're trying to break into the institutions of politics and theatre at the same time, which are two very well established institutions, if you like. And the other thing we had lots, but the other thing to say is just about, you know, who the audience is, and we had some really interesting conversation about who that audience is, and certainly where politicians are in that. And I certainly was saying that for me, it's not for us to be part of their world, to come and perform where they are, but neither is it for us to perform to politicians. We're asking politicians to be part of the dialogue, part of that audience, you know. So we had some interesting conversation about who that audience would be and the dialogues that would happen between them.
So, I mean, we talked about lots of different things about specifics, technicalities of getting people involved and how it's run, and also how to get the council involved. But as maybe a summary, I think the idea of working in a place-specific way, so making sure that the discussions are grounded in place and are actionable, therefore actionable, in terms of the specific nuances of the place. And then also how to get diversity in the room, and how long and tiring that process can be, but some methods around how to get there. And then also related to what Bob was saying earlier, how to involve the authorities in the process, throughout the process, not necessarily in the deliberation itself, but to bring them along the way, create visibility throughout, and involve them after the stage of deliberation for further deliberation with them, so that they can actually be involved in the action that needs to actually happen on the ground for change to come about. And really, I think we try to focus all the conversations and frame the whole thing in terms of sustainability rather than climate change, because that's much more inclusive. You know, there are people who aren't enthused or passionate about climate change, but most people, I would say, if not everyone, wants to see their place become sustainable and resilient moving forwards. So I think those are some of the key points.
Thanks very much, Roland. And Eva, over to you.
Yeah, we had a really lovely go around and listened to one another, and I would be hard pressed to draw out something from that very rich conversation. I think one of the things we were talking about, which isn't unusual at all, but is worth revisiting, is that we're trying to do something different here. We're trying to change the way that we have become accustomed to operating together, and that is always going to be a journey of exploration, and we're not necessarily going to know what works and what doesn't. The using language carefully, I think, is really important, and that's what the kind of last thing that we spoke about was how to talk about things that might be feel a bit more sensitive or a bit more unknown to people. Find language that can make it land and feel less threatening to people is really important. So that's me.
Thank you very much, Eva. So a huge thanks to all the panel of speakers today. Really appreciate a lot taking time out of your busy days, I'm sure, and to hear from the great wealth of experience and perspectives on the issue and ways to approach it. As I was saying before, this is only the start of the process. It's an initial taster event, but our intention at SCAN is to collaborate with open source, which has been set up by Eva in this call, to see how we can offer more full-on training and support communities all around Scotland to start this process and perhaps set up their own deliberative processes in their communities. Also, I reiterate, we have created a space in Vive, which is a networking platform with different spaces. And if you're looking for the space, it's called Thinking Local Democracy. And we intend this space to be a space to share experiences, ideas, tips and advice, reports, news, to basically have a community of practice in Scotland around deliberative processes, citizens' assembly, mini publics, etc. So I encourage you to join Vive, and on Vive you also have many other spaces which might be of interest around waste, energy, and many topics. It has been set up by Transition Network, but SCAN is on the path of embracing it fully. So thank you all for coming. And again, we had a huge turnout today, which is very excellent for this type of niche topic. So it's really inspiring to see so many people coming to those things and hear about different perspectives.